Hello and welcome to Something Rhymes with Purple. This, as our regular, very loyal listeners will know, is a podcast about words and language, either words in the news or words from the past that we think might happily be resurrected. And we always choose a theme every week, which gives us a basis for our wordy witterings. And with me, as ever, is Gyles Brandreth, looking at me from a Zoom screen. We rarely get together these days, but still happy to see you, Gyles.
I'm excited to see you. I'm relieved to see you because I've spent an hour and 8 minutes on the telephone this morning trying to transfer from my debit account some money to my credit account because my credit card kept saying yesterday declined.
Oh.
And yes, and I was in Marylebone High Street opposite Dent's bookshop. Do you know the bookshop?
I love Dent's. I do.
It's a lovely bookshop with a wonderful gallery inside there. Anyway, I treated myself to a coffee and a pain au chocolat, which is what you do when you've been on the low-carb diet for a while. You think, oh no, I can't take it any longer. And you go in, and you don't just have one pain au chocolat, you then order a second pain au chocolat. No, you don't have
five. Exactly.
And it's in Marylebone High Street, so it's really quite expensive. So I'm having a cup of tea, two of these pain au chocolat, and then I say, the bill, please. And the bill comes along, and it's quite a lot of money. It's £13 or something. But I think, well, it's been great fun. I shouldn't have done it, but anyway. So I then produce my card, and it won't go the beep. It doesn't work. So it says, put it in the machine. I put it in the machine. I put in the code, and I think, have I forgotten the code? Because it says declined. I think, I'm sure that's the code. I've been using this code for years. I think, well, maybe it's another code. So I try the other code. Declined. And so the fellow's looking at me very, very dubiously indeed. So I say, well, what am I going to do? He said, well, you pay cash. I said, I don't have cash. I said, when I live, there's no longer a cash machine. There's no longer a bank. There's no longer a cash machine.
Who has cash these days?
Who has cash? Indeed. But I have to say, I was reduced to going across the road, and by happy chance, coming out of Dent's was somebody I knew. And I borrowed £20 in cash from him. And I then ran back into the thing. I'd left them my watch, my wallet, my mobile phone as guarantee for these. So this is the point is there's a price to pay for greed. If you are on a low-carb diet, do not go into a coffee shop in Marylebone High Street and order 2 pain au chocolat. God does not approve and therefore declines your credit card. So it turned out that what had happened was I was over my limit. I didn't know there was a limit on my credit card. But anyway, I was over the limit. And anyway, so getting through this morning was a nightmare because I had to phone a certain number and then the line was poor. I had to phone the number all over again.
What you need to get is an online banking app where you can literally see your debit balance, your bank balance and your credit card balance. And you can just immediately transfer some funds from one to the other within 5 seconds.
Thank you for telling me this. This is what everybody has told me, including each of my 3 children. And I think most of my 7 grandchildren have told me exactly the same thing. But I tell you this, in the presence of witnesses last week, I tried to put this app onto my mobile phone and it kept rejecting me. It kept saying that the password that I was putting in, first of all, it said it wasn't a suitable password. I then got a suitable password. I then had to repeat the password in the second line. It then said the second line did not tally with the first line.
Oh, okay.
I did this several times and it still wouldn't tally. So the point is I have tried to get a banking app on my phone and have not succeeded in doing it. I said to the bank manager, because I'm lucky enough actually to have a real bank manager in person, in the flesh there, would you please do it for me? She said, no, I'm not allowed to do it. I said, what do you mean you're not allowed to do it? She said, no, you have to do it yourself. I said, well, I'll do it in front of your eyes. So I did it. It still didn't work. So it's very, very frustrating. It is bizarre. It is bizarre. So the banking gods are not on my side.
Lots to say, but probably not in front of the purple people, but lots to say as to how you can make your passwords tally. But anyway, we'll go into that another time.
Okay, and now we will move on to the theme of the day. Top hole. Barry Jerry pranked his kite. I'm remembering now a Monty Python sketch from years ago that I did love, where they did a sort of spoof of RAF types. And Michael Palin, I think it was, wearing a kind of moustache that they used to wear in wartime films about the Second World War, RAF types. And they used this funny kind of slang. and they did a sort of satire on it. And I've got vague memories of that at the back of my head. Is that the theme for today? RAF slang?
Yes, we're going to talk about RAF slang. And actually, you've reminded me of, well, not just Monty Python, but also there are some brilliant sketches, if you don't know them, by Ben Miller and Alexander Armstrong.
Oh, yes.
When they were a comedy duo, and they are in the RAF, only they speak as a sort of modern teenager might. And it's just, but with a very posh accent. And they talk about it's a shizzle, and it's just brilliant. Anyway, I recommend that too. But yes, we're going to talk about one of those tribal slangs which is completely opaque to the outsider, but which is extremely important to those within it because, or not within the code, but within the tribe, because it's unifying, as we always say, but it's also incredibly pragmatic very often. And as so often in the military and also in the, medical services, it is very dark. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Now, the Royal Air Force is what we're talking about, the RAF, which was founded when? I think it was called something else during the First World War, and then it was founded either during the First World War or just after the First World War, when aeroplanes came along and meant to mean something special. So this is RAF slang. And is it different from naval slang and army slang, and why is it different?
It is different because very often, first of all, they are intensely sort of united, I suppose, would be the positive way of putting it. It's really important for them to have distinct lexicons and distinct vocabularies. And very often they take the mickey out of each other as well. And they do that quite often through language. You will find some crossovers, and we'll come to this subject a little bit later. When it comes to food, if you go to the canteen or whatever, very often the food will be called all sorts of strange things. And there are quite often, real similarities between the different armed forces. But most of the time they are very specific.
Good. Well, I think probably the only bit of RAF slang that I use on a regular basis is the word pranged. Is that an RAF slang? I pranged the car. I feel that has an RAF slang feel to it, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, that's actually a really interesting one. And I think possibly, of course, the purple people will correct me on this one because they are very often right at the heart of these things, and they will know. But originally, a prang in the RAF was, of course, to crash land, an aircraft, and it's very much an onomatopoeic word. So it's based, as what we call it, is echoic. So it kind of represents the sound. But yeah, its very first meanings, as recorded at the moment in the Oxford English Dictionary, are within the RAF.
Good. And the vocabulary we're going to talk about, does it date from the First World War, the Second World War, or the whole of the 20th century?
That one is the 1940s, and that seems to be one of the really productive decades, which of course then suggests that the Second World War, we've talked before, Gyles, about how all wars, surprisingly for all their destruction, are quite productive of new vocabulary, which seems strange. So language gets generated and regenerated when everything else is sort of obviously being destroyed, which is quite a strange conundrum. But, when new phenomena come along, it's important to name them, whether it's weaponry, whether it's, tactics, military tactics, etc., which of course develop and evolve as much as the weaponry. And so it's inevitable that you need to fill a gap there. But very often as well, because perhaps at more than any other time, you need that kind of community spirit. Language then becomes this sort of bond, this kind of collective vocabulary that people can dip into and then feel part of a really important group.
Very good. And also appearance seems to make a difference too. And when I picture these people, you mentioned Ben Miller and Alexander Armstrong, I can picture them. I think they did wear these moustaches, didn't they?
Did you ever have one of those?
No, I've never had a moustache, but my father, when he was in the army during the Second World War, he had a moustache, and I think he was allowed to have a moustache when he became an officer. I think he joined as a private, but then he became an officer, and then they were allowed to have a moustache. And I think that may apply in the RAF as well. I think I'm right in saying it's only the Royal Navy where you're allowed to have a full beard. I don't think you're allowed a full beard. Maybe you are today, but certainly in wartime, the Second World War, you couldn't have a full beard if you were in either the army or the Air Force. I may have got that wrong. People can correct me on that. But the officers were allowed to wear moustaches. I'm not sure that the men, people who weren't officers, were allowed to. It's curious. But this is all part of the sort of ritual and the camaraderie and etc. of being a kind of united force, having your own rules and regulations within the group, within the tribe, as you call them.
Absolutely. And obviously within the tribe, there are different positions. So every member of the personnel will have a different name. So new recruits are Sprogs, just as people call their young kids Sprogs, don't they? That comes from an obsolete word, sprag, meaning a young boy. We have auxiliary members of the RAF are called Oggies. Not related to the oggy, oi, 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 that is behind the story of the Cornish pasty. We have a duty dog, which is an orderly officer. A fang farrier, which is one of my favourites. That's the RAF dentist, which is quite good. You have a nugget, a pilot on their first tour. Blunties. Now, blunties are non-flying personnel, and the reason they're called blunties is that they're not at the sharp end of action. So they're all quite clever. A hog dangler is a dog handler. So that's just a bit of backslang there, where they've transposed the beginnings of the words. Brain on a chain is an RAF police dog. And the implication, I guess, is that they're more intelligent than their handlers. So there's a lot of self-mockery going on here, as you can see. The God Botherer is the chaplain. The ginger beer is rhyming slang for an engineer. A sky pilot. I think we may have talked about this before, actually, when we were talking about military personnel. But can you guess what a sky pilot is?
Well, no.
And it's a strange one, isn't it? It's a chaplain.
Oh, but of course, up in the sky near to God. How amusing. A sky pilot, that is funny. Go on.
And a Tiffy is a typhoon, or at least it was, a typhoon jet fighter. And a Zobbit is a commissioned officer, especially one perhaps that is slightly self-important, and that may come from an Arabic word, dabit, meaning an officer. And there are lots more. There's a scuffer, there's a shiny, an administrative employee who wears shiny trousers, maybe because they've been sitting down so long, and again, it's a bit of a jibe at their inaction, so to speak. So lots and lots of different names, and they're really, they're really important. They are all part of this code.
Well, I'm now able to give you some updated information about the question of beards and moustaches, because it appears what I was telling you would have been true of my father's generation in the Second World War, but it's all changed in the RAF. In 2019, they changed the rules so that it became possible. They updated their guidelines around facial hair. So you can actually grow beards for the first time in the service's history. So up until 2019, beards were verboten. But now, all RAF personnel are permitted to grow a full-set beard and moustache, but they must make a request to their commanding officer, in writing, prior to any growth of facial hair. So now you know. Yeah,
I mean, for religious reasons, it might be quite important. So lots of kind of cultural factors, aren't there?
Absolutely.
Feeding into that.
There are, and that apparently is the real reason they thought about it too, because also they want to increase. It was a recruitment issue.
And drive for inclusivity and diversity is really important. Now we've talked about other expressions that began with the in the RAF. Many of them actually from the 1940s. We've talked about "gone for a Burton" numerous times.
Ah, yes, and that's getting the suit, isn't it? Your D-mob suit from Burton the Tailors.
No, that's the full Monty. Oh. That is the full Monty.
Oh, that's the full. Why do I bring Burton the Tailors into it?
Because the full Monty was the full Montague Burton, the Tailors. So the full Monty was a pair of trousers, a jacket, and a spare pair of trousers, or according to another theory, a waistcoat as well as a jacket and trousers. And as you say, they made all the D-mob suits. So if you went for the full Monty, you got the whole set. But "Gone for a Burton," we think, is a reference to Burton upon Trent, which was home to a lot of ale manufacturers, including famously Burton's Ale. And it's just a sort of rather dark metaphor for going into the drink and crashing into the sea. We have, so many. We have going pear-shaped. That is found in RAF slang, and it's a reference to the shape of an aircraft that has crashed nose first, which is, again, you can see the darkness here, can't you? Pushing the envelope is not so dark, but that is all about aeronautics and the idea of actually going beyond the current limits of performance of a plane. So you're pushing the envelope, and the envelope is the sort of flight path, if you like. So that one also began in the RAF. I mean, there are just so many. And you know how we always try to ascribe a nautical origin to everything? one. In fact, you can also look at the RAF and the other military forces and think, wow, actually that one came from there too.
Did you just tell me what going pear-shaped? Why is it going pear-shaped?
I did.
You did mention that, but why pear-shaped as opposed to banana-shaped or orange-shaped or?
Because it's the shape that the aircraft makes as its kind of it's the action of the plane and the path that it traces as it dives headfirst into the sea, apparently.
Oh, that's interesting, because, I mean, I heard what you said, but I didn't quite understand why it was a pear shape. Does it, well...
Yeah. Let's see the first records here in the OED, tapering towards the top and rounded at the bottom to go...
Because you'd think it would be... It's an upside...
Yeah,
I mean, I can see it's an upside-down pear because it ends, when it goes in, the point goes into the water.
It doesn't actually say in the OED, it just simply says to go pear-shaped, to go awry. Originally RAF slang, the nose started to go down. Yeah, I think we'd have to get purple people who have been in the RAF. Sadly, I can't ask my dad, but just exactly why that, why it refers to
my father-in-law, my late father-in-law, was also in the RAF. We can't ask him either. So, going pear-shaped. Give us some more.
Going pear-shaped. Well, boffin is always a nice one because, there's been quite a campaign recently by, people who do work in STEM subjects, whether it's engineers, whether it's scientists, etc., who resent, understandably, I think, being called boffins by the press, by the tabloids particularly. They will talk about boffins. But I was asked about this quite recently, and although I can see that it might be reductive and just sort of imply that they're nerds kind of poring over sort of dusty volumes, a bit like lexicographers. Actually, I do think the tabloids do use it as quite an affectionate moniker. It's not meant disparagingly at all. And it's very much part of tabloid-ese and that kind of tradition. So I can definitely see both sides with that one. But the curious thing is that we don't know where boffin itself came from. So it was used by the RAF in the Second World War for a research scientist, one of the backroom boys, and then passed into more general use again in the 1940s. So there is a theory, as always, when we don't know the answer, a lot of people come up with theories, that it may derive from a torpedo bomber, the Blackburn Baffin, which was named after a navigator called William Baffin, who discovered Baffin Bay in the North Atlantic. So that's one theory. But honestly, if you look it up in most dictionaries, it will say origin unknown.
Very good.
So shall I tell you a little bit about the equipment? That some of the slang terms for the equipment that's used within the RAF. I mean, I think most people will know about G pants, which are those night. Oh, okay. So it's to...
I've never heard of G-pants. I've heard of the G-string. I've heard of the G-spot. I've heard of G-whiz. But I have not heard of G-pants.
Okay. Well, the G is... the G-force is essentially what will make you very, very sick if you're going up and joining, say, the Red Arrows on their amazing aerobatic manoeuvres. And G-pants are nylon trousers that they wrap around the legs and the body, and they fill automatically with compressed air in high G manoeuvres. And this is to prevent the pooling of blood in the lower extremities and to literally stop you going unconscious. God. I think outside the RAF, they're known as speed jeans, but they're called G-pants within the RAF. There is a BAT decoder, and that is a document carried on all fight operations, and that's the key or code unlocker to current airborne communication codes. That's called the BAT decoder. Shreddies, male underwear. I'm not sure I suppose this is equipment. Desert lily. And a desert lily is a urinal made from a tin can.
Oh, lovely.
And of course, the Thunderbox is a kind of chemical toilet, which they will all be very used to using.
Well, some of these are quite old. I mean, I remember the Thunderbox appearing in novels by Evelyn Waugh, written about the war years.
Yeah.
The Thunderbox. So it must date back at least to the 1940s, if not before.
No, absolutely. A lot of them are very old. And do you know what? I was talking to, when I wrote my book on tribal slang, this was quite a while ago now. So I imagine that, like all slang, it's probably moved on since then, although I suspect there will be some enduring terms. Doby was always laundry and washing from Hindi, and Doby dust is washing powder. And then, of course, NATO standard is the usual response to how do you want your tea or coffee. So it means with milk and sugar, which is good.
But explain the NATO standard. I mean, why is that the response?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, that must be just like, oh, well, that's how everybody everybody has it. I wonder if there's some kind of acronym thing in there. I can't see the sort of milk and sugar bit. I don't know. Any purple person who has used this?
It's NATO as in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Yeah, it must be NATO standard. So maybe that's what everybody used to have. I don't know. But there will be a purple person that knows for sure.
They will be, because I mean, how old is NATO? I imagine NATO dates from the 1950s, 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, remember all of these, as we said, will quite possibly have been around for a while. I'll see if NATO standard is in. I doubt it will be in the OED. Because it's
a funny expression.
No, it's not there.
How do you want your tea? NATO standard. and putting on this ridiculous voice that when they're doing it, you know.
Right, what else do we have? Once you're up in the air, quite often if they're talking about a cloudless sky, they will talk about it being ginners, as clear as gin.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and I think submariners actually use that as well. So they remove any oil from periscope lenses with gin until they were gin clear. They have goo, which is bad weather that dramatically reduces visibility, which makes them be in the soup. They have angels. So an angels followed by a number, refers to a plane's altitude, and it's measured in 1,000 feet. So angels 12 means you're flying at 12,000 feet. I always think that's quite beautiful.
That is nice.
If you do a bat turn, you do a tight high G change of direction, and that is because of the Batmobile maneuver in the old Batman TV programs where they do a rapid kind of 180-degree turn. So, yeah, I could go on and on and on because, honestly, it is almost endless, but it is just extremely colourful and means everything to those within the RAF.
Great. Well done. And are you telling me that most of these expressions that you shared with us, when you were doing your research, you actually found that contemporary members of the RAF, officers, men, women, serving, are using these phrases as part of their everyday discourse?
I think so. These are the ones that I was given, and they weren't necessarily by people who had been within the force, the veterans. They were, fairly young people that I spoke to. But again, the purple people, because they are in so many different places and so many different professions, they will be able to tell us. I mean, one other example was wallop for beer, and you'll find this in all three services actually, and it was originally used in pub slang, essentially, probably because it gives you a kick, although wallop was then later also a term for weak beer, one that didn't give you a kick, which, if you remember, also gave us Cod's wallop, because Hiram Cod developed these glass stoppered bottles that would keep the fizz of soft drinks, and Hiram Cod's wallop, or cheap beer, i.e. not the strong stuff, then became a byword for nonsense because it wasn't the real thing. So that's done an interesting turn, and maybe that it's preserved a very different meaning in the RAF, I'm not sure, but I would absolutely love to hear more. So any purple people who can dip into the lexicon of the RAF and give us some new ones, or tell us what's not being used anymore, I'd really welcome that.
And I would welcome further intelligence on facial hair in the armed forces. What I do know is the new RAF regulations, they do allow you to have neat beards, neat moustaches and neat heads of hair, but they don't allow hair colouring. So don't think you can come to work, chaps, with bright orange hair. It's just not on.
Okay.
Cheerio, pip, pip. We have a new email address, newish anyway. It's purplepeople@somethingrhymes.com. Purplepeople@somethingrhymes.com. Who has been in touch with us this week? It's so wonderful for us. We get letters from around the world. Who's been in touch this week?
Yes. So do you have the email from Niccolo in front of you?
I do. Grazie mille, Niccolo. And where does Niccolo come from, do you know? Shall I read it to you?
Yes, please read it to us.
Niccolo writes, "Dear Susie and Gyles, thanks lots for this wonderful podcast, which is following me weekly around the world. I discovered it while I was in Taiwan. It followed me to Germany and back home to Italy. I really love it. My question is, release, relax, let and leave, all share a common sense of setting something free or loose. Is it possible that all these words share the same root? L-E. There's L-E in release, relax, let, leave. As an ancient Greek undergraduate student, I know that leipia, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, leipia, to leave, has the same root. I cannot wait to listen to your next episode." Well, many thanks. Grazie mille, says Niccolo. I didn't pronounce the ancient Greek very well, but is there any connection between these words and let? Leave,
Certainly semantically, when it comes to meanings, yes, but not so much etymologically as far as we can see. So I'll start with release. And that is actually a variant of a word from the Latin relaxare. So it's a sibling of relax. And to relaxare for the Romans was to loosen or stretch out. And laxare, which of course gave us lax, means to loosen. So that does fit Nicolo's bill. It is all about loosening and releasing. Then you have relieve, and that actually goes back to a different Latin root, relevare, in which the levare gave us levitation and levity and that kind of thing, because it's all about lifting up or raising up. So the idea is that you are lifting someone's or lightening someone's load, if that makes sense. Then we have let. And that one is a Germanic, actually, word. It has been around, obviously, since Old English. Lots of what we call cognates or relatives in other languages. But we think the ancient root of that is indeed an LE root, meaning to let go or slacken. But it isn't, we think, the same ancient root as release and relieve. And Nicola, obviously, all the work will still go on. I'll finish with leave, because that's a really nice one. So leave in the sense of the noun, rather than leaving a place as a verb. So you're giving somebody liberty or license to do something. That actually goes back to an ancient root meaning to love, which is quite lovely. So it's the idea really of giving approval because you are happy about it or because you love someone asking for it, which is quite an unlikely coupling, I always think. So as far as we know, all distinct. But, you know, if you were to draw a family tree, I suspect they would be close to each other, if not coming from exactly the same line.
Well, that was pretty comprehensive. Well done, Susie Dent. You tell us who the next letter comes from. Please share it with us.
Okay, so this is from Thomas. This is in Gyles. I was listening to the wonderful Angélique Kidjo being interviewed.
Yes.
Is that what she's called? Kidjo? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Being interviewed on BBC Radio 4's This Cultural Life. She described her younger self as a tomboy, which got me thinking. Tom is a masculine name used for masculine things such as a tomcat, and boy is also masculine, but a tomboy is feminine. So it seems more appropriate for a young woman tom-tomming from the top of a tree, engaging in some tomfoolery and generally behaving like any other Tom, Dick or Harry, to be called a tom girl. Or perhaps a boy Jane. Can Susie get to the bottom of this? And no doubt Gyles has a customary tale or two about having met Angélique Kidjo. Have you, Gyles? Yes, please.
Indeed. Shall I go first? Oh, of course. I mean, my gosh. I tell you, the thing I know most about Angélique Kidjo is that she originates her family from what is now called Benin, but it was French Dahomey. And her birthday was the 14 juillet, was the 14th of July. I think she was born back in 1960, but she is, I mean, some people describe her as Africa's premier diva. In fact, I think Time magazine called her that. She is an extraordinary, an electric performer, and I encountered her when, after she performed at the Tokyo Olympic Games, she did the sort of opening song. She was in Paris briefly, and I can't pretend we had a close encounter, but we were in the same room, and there were no more than 300 other people in the room at the same time. So I have seen her
still counts.
across. It does count. I think it does count. And she's performed with all sorts of people, from Bono to Sting to. I mean, she's just one of the greats. So
yes. Okay, so shall I answer the question? It is a bit of a strange one, it has to be said. So a tomboy, the term originated in the mid-16th century to mean a rude, boisterous boy. So it was masculine to begin with. But then it quickly developed to mean, and I'll give you the dictionary definition, a wild, romping girl, or a girl who acts like a spirited boy. So that's recorded just 40 years later in the 1590s. And then, as so often, kind of implications of immorality or promiscuity crept in. And this happens so much with the vocabulary of women. So it could mean strumpet, a bold or immodest woman. So Tom Girl, which you might think would be the more logical name, really, for a girl who behaves in a boyish fashion. That came along later as a riff on tomboy. So obviously people had the same idea, really, as Thomas did. And just thought, surely that can't be right. So Tom Girl is first recorded in, I think, the late 19th century. And it was actually in the name of a character called Miss Tom Girl Thomas. So it's always been a tomboy. And I have to say that English is never completely logical. In fact, sometimes it just goes off in its very eccentric way. And this is a really good example of it. But I'm with Thomas. It should be a Tom Girl.
And did you tell us just then when tomboy is first used in English?
Yes, the mid-16th century, 1550s.
As early as that, because I used to think it came from Tom Sawyer.
Oh, no.
And it was behaving in a tomboyish way because in Victorian times, Tom Sawyer became this hugely famous, world-famous character. And I know a lot of girls wanted to be like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and I thought it might have been that. But it goes right back to the 16th century.
Yeah.
My goodness,
yeah. No,
that's amazing.
Odd, but it doesn't really make much sense, which I totally get. But thank you, Thomas, for that, and indeed Niccolo as well. Now, do you know what, Gyles? We are quickly coming up for our 250th episode of Something Rhymes with Purple, which is extraordinary. And so...
What is that called? What is the 250th called? It's a quarter of 1,000, isn't it?
Yeah.
Quarter of a millennium.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
250th. Wow.
So for our anniversary,
yes,
we would like to make it all about the purple people, we decided, didn't we? So we're going to have a correspondence episode, which I have to say is one of my absolute favourite things. So if you have any etymological queries or questions, no matter how big or small, please write and voice note them all over to our email address. And that is purplepeople@somethingrhymes.com. And as always, we'll try to get to as many as possible.
I have to just say here that this is Susie's decision that it should be the people's voice. I wanted another episode on rude words because we haven't had one for almost 250 episodes. And I wanted an episode on really amusing, unusual, rude words. Not words that are rude because they're disgusting and people hate them or shouldn't be using them, but novelty rude words. So that will be coming up eventually, but not immediately. The 250th episode will be you, the purple people, asking your questions. And then a little bit later on, there'll be some rudery from me. Immediately, have you got a trio of intriguing words to delight us with this week, Susie?
I do. So the first one, it kind of fits in with the Monty Python sketch or the Armstrong and Miller sketch, because very often, certainly in the latter, Alexander Armstrong and Ben Miller are smoking pipes. And so I thought I would talk about going lunting. And lunting, or to lunt, centuries ago, meant to go for a walk and smoke a pipe at the same time. Amazing that there is a verb specifically for that.
I love it. I'm going lunting.
Yes.
After lunch, I'm going lunting. I love it. I can picture it. There's something quite reassuring. I'm sure smoking pipes is not good for you, but there's something quite reassuring about sort of walking through the bracken with your Labrador at your knees, smoking your pipe.
Smoking your pipe.
Yes, go on. Give us another one.
So I think the next two might be familiar, actually, to some of the purple people and to you, Gyles. To be beef-witted, it's just so evocative, I think. If you are beef-witted, or at least if you were in the 16th century, you're just extremely stupid. Don't be so beef-witted, which I think is quite interesting. I think the idea is that you've just gratified your stomach so much that actually you're just a bit stupefied because you're so full.
Or maybe, forgive me, maybe because beef, a huge animal is sort of so thick.
Oh, but they're not.
Could that be
Cows
it?
are absolutely not thick.
I appreciate that, and we know pigs are super intelligent, but just the visual thing.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe.
Oh, you think it is because you're sort of sated with food?
Well, I think Shakespeare may have used this, actually. I'll go and double check to see how he used it and if he gives us a clue, because he often does. And then the third one is, I just like behoove. And to behoove you is it to be necessary or appropriate to you. So, that behaviour does not behoove you. Gyles, for example, or behove.
Behove. I would have said behove. Yeah. I thought it was spelled Behove.
Yeah, it is, but it can also, at least it was once spelled with double O, which I kind of think looks sweeter. But behove or behoove, I just think they're all, of course, inflections of behave. But I just love the idea of it, and I think we should reintroduce it into our conversation.
I say behove, you say behoove. Let's call the whole thing off.
Let's call the whole thing off. Right, you always have a lovely poem for us, and I'm sure today's no exception.
Well, I have got a lovely poem this week because, of course, I was thinking about the Royal Air Force, and immediately one poem came into my mind, and it's a poem I've known all my life, really. There was a famous film made
Yeah.
during the war, the end of the Second World War. That was a very popular film, and the film was called The Way to the Stars. And there were many films made during the war, propaganda films, and after the war, films celebrating the achievements of the Allies during the war. And I think in this film, I think it was the voice of Michael Redgrave that read the film, but I have heard recordings of people like Laurence Olivier reading this particular poem. It's called For Johnny. It's about an RAF pilot, and it's written by a man called John Pudney, who was a well-known poet. He'd been commissioned into the Royal Air Force as an intelligence officer, and during the war he was a member of the Air Ministry's Creative Writers Unit. And he published various articles and a lot of poetry during the war, including this poem that became very popular, and it's simply called For Johnny. Do not despair, for Johnny head in air, he sleeps as sound as Johnny underground. Fetch out no shroud for Johnny in the cloud, and keep your tears for him in after years. Better by far for Johnny the bright star to keep your head and see his children fed.
Oh.
There you are, a poem for one of the many extraordinary young men, and they mostly were very young men indeed, who lost their lives during the Second World War, particularly during the Battle of Britain. Amazing. So it's a short, moving poem that moved people hugely at the time of the Second World War, and I think still packs a punch today.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And we hope that you do too. Thank you, as always, for following us and listening to us here and following us on social media as well. Just a reminder, there is the Purple Plus Club. I do notice sometimes in the comments, actually, Gyles, people are a bit sad about the subscription, the Purple Plus Club, thinking that it is, it excludes them. But I would just say it is very much a bonus club. We have a lot of fun in it, but it doesn't affect the main episodes, which are a lot longer. And, they are still, we hope, worth it.
What it gives you is ad-free listening, which some people like. I, of course, like the ads. That's because sometimes I make ads and I find them quite intriguing. And on television, I often think the ads are better than the programs.
Oh, interesting. I think it's when you certainly when you're looking at YouTube or something like that, when you literally see the same one every 2 minutes. Anyway.
Oh, I know. It can be quite irritating, can't it? Yeah. And you try and press the thing that says skip ads and it doesn't.
No, definitely not on there. But anyway, that's a different discussion. The one here today is coming to an end, and Something Rhymes with Purple is a Sony Music Entertainment production. It was produced by Naya Dio with additional production from Naomi Oiku, Sophie King, Hannah Newton, Chris Skinner, Poppy Thompson, and the invisible genius himself, Richie. And he's got a full beard.
He's got a full beard. Do you remember that hairy blighter, the dicky-birded, feathered back, the fellow we used to call Gully? Where's he gone? I think he's gone for a Burton, yes.